I've got good news. If you are a Dark Side of the Ring fan, Vice has greenlit future episodes of the show, which the network's general manager called a mega hit for the network. The first 3 episodes of the new season were the top 3 most watched shows in the history of Vice Network. So that's a good sign. So we'll be getting at least another season of Dark Side, maybe more. And it sounds like they want to branch off into other worlds as well, whatever that means. They said the audience is telling us that they love this kind of storytelling, so we want to keep delivering on that over and over again. That was the quote from the Vice release. If it's not wrestling, honestly, I'm not interested. But it's nice to see wrestling is doing well for the network, even if the subject matter is very dark. I mean, it's kind of in the name, right? Dark Side of the Ring. But if they're going to be doing at least another season, you got the WWF scandals of the early 90s. You've got the Vince McMahon steroid trial from 94. Brian Pillman, Chyna, Art Barr, Grizzly Smith. Grizzly Smith, and probably tie Jake Roberts into it, but just Grizzly Smith alone, when you read up on that guy, I mean, you talk about Dark Side of the Ring, that guy is the definition of dark. That could probably be a whole 2-parter on, him and Jake alone if you tie the 2 of them together, being that it was his father. I mean, there's a lot of topics left for them to cover. We're only 4 months into the year. I feel like they'll probably be able to dedicate an entire episode to Vince McMahon in the year 2020. Just with the year he's having so far. They could probably just do 1 episode devoted to Vince and not even touch on anything else. You can probably add Teddy Hart and Maria Manic to that list as well. But they're also about to start airing extended cut episodes with bonus scenes. This Tuesday, the extended cut of the Dino Bravo episode airs, I believe, at 8:30. And the After Dark show is going to air right after that at 9:30. And that'll lead directly into a new episode at 10 p.m. For the Bravo After Dark, they're going to have Jimmy Hart, Jacques Rougeau, and Uncle Fred, the Shockmaster. I'm going to bring him in as well to talk to him. Tugboat. I mean, Earthquake was tag team partners with Bravo, not Tugboat. Earthquake's passed away. Maybe that's why they're going to have Fred Ottman on. I don't know. It's kind of an odd choice. But anyway, that's coming up this week. The story of Dino Bravo was the subject of last week's episode. This is the one that I was looking forward to probably the most of all the topics. It seems, look, on the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. As far as what happened to him. He wasn't the biggest name in wrestling. He was a name. And we all know what happened to him. And I didn't expect much in the way of new information to be uncovered after almost 30 years. But it's a story that never really got any mainstream attention here in this country. It probably did up in Montreal at the time. And I just find it fascinating how this guy went from being a famous pro wrestler to being a mob associate, to being shot 17 times in his living room in 1993. Someone really wanted this guy dead. My biggest disappointment is that they did not interview Rick Martel. They tried to get Rick Martel. Martel declined to be interviewed. Now remember, this is still an unsolved crime, probably involving the Canadian Mafia. Although Martel has talked about this publicly in the past. When you look at it like that, though, as far as him going on TV to talk about this all over again, I can understand why he may not have wanted to go on television to be interviewed. I don't know if that's the reason why he didn't want to do it, or if it's just, hey, I'm divorced from the wrestling industry. I'm happy with my life. I'm just, thanks, but no thanks. I don't know what his mindset was on that, but certainly you can understand why he might not want to do this. But it was still disappointing because he and Dino were close friends. Dino confided in Martel about things that he was doing in his life, things that he would not admit to anybody else in the wrestling business. He admitted to and confided into Martel. Thankfully, they included footage from the shoot interview that Martel did in 2007, talking about what happened to Bravo. They found Dino's wife and daughter, who agreed to be interviewed, and that was a big coup, because this was the very first time they have really talked about any of this since his wife talked to police after he was killed in 93. His family has not commented publicly about this until now. Everything they said was in French, so we got subtitles. I can never understand why some people have an issue with subtitles, unless they can't read. If they're illiterate, I can understand. If you are not illiterate and you can, or dyslexic or anything, and you can read, there's nothing wrong with reading subtitles. Some of my favorite TV shows and movies that I've seen have subtitles in them. It took me all of 5 minutes to get used to it the first time I started watching them. All I'm saying is don't close your mind off to TV shows and movies just because they have subtitles. Some people do. Some people, they just, nope, can't watch it. It's got subtitles, I'm not interested. You're really missing out. If you do that, I'm telling you, there's quality TV out there you're missing out on if you close your mind off to that. Dino's daughter was 6 years old when her father was killed. And it breaks your heart to listen to her talk about her dad and how she glows when she's showing old photos of them together. And then at the very end of the episode, to see her crying, talking about what happened to him and hoping that the person who did this to him got exactly what they deserved. That was tough to watch. That was very tough to watch. There apparently was a scene that was cut that might be released later as a deleted scene, according to the executive producer, of Earthquake playing cards with a young Claudia. Earthquake playing cards with Dino's daughter. The actor that they got to play Earthquake, I've got to say, or at least Earthquake's silhouette in some of those locker room scenes, those reenactments, that guy was bang on. I don't know who that was, but the person they got to play Earthquake, just in terms of his body frame and the bald head and everything, bang on. Bang on. Just looked just like, well, he wasn't bald. I mean, the top of his head was bald. Earthquake did have hair. But anyway, they spoke to Jacques Rougeau, the Mountie. I think as older wrestlers go, I don't know how old Jacques is now. He's got to be 60-ish probably, maybe late 50s, early 60s. I got to say, he and his brother Ray, they look damn good. They look a lot better than some of the guys they worked with back in the 80s. The ones that are still alive. Feels like there aren't very many of them left. But if they were doing stuff and taking stuff like a lot of those guys were doing, it looks like they weren't, but if they were, they obviously knew their limits because they still look great. They interviewed Jacques, they interviewed Jimmy Hart, they interviewed Pat LaPrade, the wrestling historian who also co-authored the new Andre the Giant book that just came out. They interviewed Tony Mioli, who was the promoter for international wrestling out of Montreal back in the 70s and 80s, where Dino was a big star. They interviewed Gino Brito, former wrestler and promoter, who was very tight with Dino Bravo, and they also talked to two crime reporters out of Montreal, one named Andre and the other named Claude. Andre, Claude, and Jacques. I don't know that you could get three more French-Canadian sounding names than that. Andre, Claude, and Jacques. Holy cow. My exposure to Dino Bravo was limited to what I would consider his third run working for WWE. I say third because his first time around, he was a WWE Tag Team Champion with Dominic DeNucci. They beat Mr. Fuji and Professor Tanaka for the titles, then lost them a few months later. This would have been back in 1978. Later on, when Vince McMahon muscled his way into Montreal, I mean, he was muscling his way into every territory, but when Vince was muscling his way into Montreal, WWE took over the international wrestling promotion. If they bought them out, or I guess they bought them out, Bravo had a big name there. He was one of their biggest stars, champions. And what they did was they awarded Dino Bravo the Canadian heavyweight title. The I guess it would have been WWF possibly. Actually, no, it would have been WWF. They gave him the WWF Canadian heavyweight title. So just like Triple H was handed the big gold belt by Eric Bischoff out of a briefcase, and all of a sudden he was the champion. Pat Patterson, contrary to popular belief, believe it or not, he did not actually win a tournament in Rio de Janeiro to become the IC champion. I know it's hard to believe. I know it's like telling people that the Tooth Fairy doesn't exist, but believe it or not, they handed Pat Patterson the Intercontinental title. It was kind of a phantom title change. So it was a similar situation here. He didn't beat anybody for it, but they created this Canadian heavyweight title. It was an official WWE championship. Lasted less than a year, from August of '85 to January of 86. They awarded the title to Bravo. He defended it several times in different Canadian cities. Well, I mean, actually, it was really just 2 Canadian cities. He defended it in Toronto when they would come to the Maple Leaf Gardens, and in Montreal at the Montreal Forum. Now, I know he defended against Randy Savage a couple of times. There's a record of him defending, I think, twice against Savage. And you can actually find footage online of him defending the title against Nikolai Volkov on an episode of Primetime Wrestling. And then what I would consider to be the third run in WWE for him was from 86 to 92 when they let him go. That's what I grew up on. As far as my exposure to Bravo, that's the run that I remember him for. I knew nothing of Dino Bravo, the dark-haired, babyface from Montreal, who was a big, big name up there. I knew him as the blonde-haired heel that partnered with Earthquake and basically, jobbed out for guys like Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. I knew him from the bench press challenge at the Royal Rumble in 1988, where Jesse Ventura spotted him for what they claimed was a 655-pound bench press. It was a new bench press record. He could bench press a lot. Supposedly he could bench press somewhere in the range of 500 pounds. I don't think it was 655. Something tells me the fix was in at the Rumble. But my biggest Dino Bravo memory as a kid was probably the angle they shot on Superstars in late 89 when Earthquake made his WWF debut. You had Bravo and Jimmy Hart. They challenged the Ultimate Warrior to a test of strength. They were challenging him to a push-up contest. And they picked Earthquake. Big guy, right? This guy looks like every bit of 350, 400. They plucked him out of the crowd as a fan. Very large fan. To sit on Bravo's back while he did push-ups in the ring. And he did them, and then it was the Ultimate Warrior's turn, and he got down on, his hands. He was going to do the push-ups, and Earthquake jumped up into the air, and he sat on the Warrior's back and squashed him. So that's what I remember Dino Bravo from, was that whole angle where Earthquake debuted, and they beat the crap out of the Ultimate Warrior. Otherwise, he was a mid-card guy. To me, as a kid, he's a middle-of-the-card guy with a funny accent. That's just how I knew him. He was not a big name. He was not a big deal to me. Little did I know, years earlier, he was the top babyface leading a promotion that had an audience of 2 million people watching every single week at its peak. Raw gets 2 million people each week now. Actually, it doesn't. Actually, Raw gets less than that now. But up until recently, Monday Night Raw was getting 2 million people each week, and that's on a network here in this country with a reach of something like 100 million people across the entire U.S. They were doing that in Quebec. Bravo was a big shot up there. And from that promotion, Vince McMahon poached a lot of talent. He took Rick Martel. He took the Rougeau brothers. He took Haku. I think he was King Tonga. They took him and rebranded him as Haku. And eventually Dino Bravo. And Jacques Rougeau talked in the special here about wanting Bravo's spot. He was not shy about it. He said, look, me and my brother, we were usually relegated to like third or fourth on the card. Dino was in all the main events. He was basically the promoter or co-promoter, and he was booking himself in all the main events. Jacques didn't like that. And he and his brother, they got the call from Vince McMahon eventually and Pat Patterson about coming on into the WWF. And, they didn't get into all of the history with McMahon sort of invading the Canadian territory like he invaded everywhere else. He bought out some of the promoters up there. There was a Toronto promotion that Vince bought. He worked out a deal with Stu Hart to buy Stampede out of Calgary, although he ended up selling it back to him a year later. But then there was this sort of renegade promotion, which was International Wrestling out of Montreal. So they worked out a deal with them where they would co-promote some shows together. They would pit WWF stars against the local talent, the Quebec wrestlers, and they drew really well. Business was good. It was during this period where Bravo wrestled some matches for Vince. I mentioned as the WWF Canadian Heavyweight Champion. And everything was building to a big match between Hulk Hogan and Dino Bravo, which they did touch on a little bit here in the documentary, that would have been in January of 1986. Locally, they were building to Hogan against Bravo. That was also the last time that we ever saw the WWF Canadian Heavyweight Belt. Why was it the last time that we ever saw the Canadian Heavyweight Belt? Because the planned match never happened. At the last minute, WWF changed the match because, as the story goes, they were worried that Bravo would be cheered over Hogan, or would get more cheers than Hogan would. And that would make Hogan look bad, so they changed the match. They both wrestled that night on that show in January of 86. They both were on the card that night, but instead Hogan ended up wrestling Cowboy Bob Orton, and Bravo beat Big John Studd. After that, Bravo quit working for WWE. He was very upset that they changed the match. He did not get that match with Hogan. And that was the last we ever saw of the Canadian Heavyweight title. It was retired, never to be seen again. He would not appear on another WWE show until October of that year. So he was gone for many months. I think it was like 9 months he was gone, and then he came back. This is not the first time that we have heard stories of Vince McMahon getting cold feet on a match or a program that might make Hulk Hogan look bad, or that he might get booed in. It happened with Jake the Snake Roberts, right? The famous Snake Pit segment where I think only people who lived in Rhode Island saw it, or something like that, because it only aired in that market and then it was never seen again. But it was this famous Snake Pit segment where he dropped Hogan with the DDT, and the crowd erupted into cheers for Jake the Snake. They never aired the segment on TV, I think outside maybe of that one market. And the two of them never worked a proper program together. They had maybe a few house show matches, but they never actually worked together. You can find Hogan on the Snake Pit. You go searching on YouTube or Daily Motion and stuff, you will find at least one, maybe two Snake Pit segments, interview segments, where Jake talked to Hulk. That is not the segment. That is not the segment. So now that we've seen the Bret Hart-Tom McGee match from the vault, I think that Snake Pit segment is the new Holy Grail that we need WWE to one day release. Because we know they've got it in the archives somewhere. Maybe it's lost. Maybe it's mislabeled. Who knows? It's got to be in there somewhere. Hopefully one day we'll get to see it. But, look, Vince was smart. He knew what he was doing. He agreed to partner with International Wrestling and do these interpromotional matches. Because after that happened, he pulled out of the deal and signed a deal with the Montreal Forum to basically boot the local promotion out of their own building. So, that's what he did. And by the end of that year, Dino's company was on its last legs, and he had to take a deal. He took a deal to come back to WWE because he couldn't resist the money that they were offering. He took a deal for $300,000 a year. This is in 1986 money. He took a deal for $300,000 a year. He wound up making a lot more than that. Supposedly, he made in excess of $1 million. He bought $1 million house. He bought a Mercedes-Benz. He bought his 4-year-old daughter. Think about this. His daughter was 4. He bought his 4-year-old daughter a car. I don't mean a Matchbox car. I mean an actual car. He bought her a red car. I don't know if it was a red Corvette or what kind of car it was, but he bought her a red car. I think when I was 4 years old, my father bought me an Etch-a-Sketch. My father was a truck driver, though. He wasn't making $300,000 a year wrestling. Although he was 6'2", I would say my father was probably 240-ish, I'd say. My father was 6'2", 240. He probably could have wrestled if he wanted to. But, what I get out of this, when you hear the daughter speak and you see the pictures of him with his family and his daughter and all the extravagant spending, he obviously loved his daughter very much. His daughter says that she thinks he was just really proud of his success and wanted to show it off. So he lived the high life. He made his money, but he also spent his money. Like Jim Ross he'll sometimes tell people when he was in talent relations, he would tell people all the time, you're gonna make some money, and it's not about what you make. You can make $1 million, you can make $5 million in wrestling. You have the potential to make a lot of money. It's not about what you make, it's what you save. And there were a lot of guys back then who didn't think like that. Nobody was telling them that. They made the money, and the money went right back out. And it sounds like that was the case with Dino Bravo, and that would prove to be his downfall in the end. I felt like they glossed over his WWE career a little too much. I understand this was about his death more than his career, but I would have liked for them to get into more of the stuff he did while he was there. You know, Vince suggested that he bleach his hair blonde, which he hated, but he liked making money. So he did it. He had his wife help him bleach his hair. Bleached it so much that she claimed that she burned his scalp as they were doing it. He hated his whole WWE gimmick. He hated it because he was so used to being the hero. And now he had to play the anti-American villain, dye his hair, act all smug. It just wasn't something that he ever apparently liked doing. I'll say this for Dino Bravo. He played the smug heel on TV very well. So if he didn't like doing it, it didn't come across that way on TV. He'd come out, big smile, big grin on his face, acting all smug. He definitely played the part well. I found absolutely nothing likable about this guy on TV. He also didn't like doing jobs. It's very different when you go from running your own promotion to working for somebody else. And Jacques says, Dino had a hard time adjusting to that. By 92, the company felt they got everything out of him that they could, and they fired him. He'd gone back to the black hair by this point. At the end of that run in WWE in 92, he had ditched the blonde hair and he had gone back to the black. And I always thought that was weird. I had only ever really known him to have the blonde hair. So seeing him with the dark hair was strange. But he didn't last much longer after that. And I'll also say, watching some of his early work, he was much smaller. I mean, he was always a big guy, but compared to the way he looked in his WWE run, he was much smaller. Not as jacked up as he looked in WWE, all swelled up the way he was. And in his younger days, he could really move around. He'd be throwing these nice drop kicks and everything. It's a side of him I just never really got to see. So now Dino was out of wrestling. The bills were piling up. He had to find a way to make money. I don't know if he ever tried to get into WCW. That was never mentioned. I don't know that he would have wanted to move his family, which he may have had to do. He may have had to move them down south. So maybe that had something to do with him not going. Rick Martel, in that 2007 Shoot interview, said that when he found out that WWE was going to let Dino go, or Dino told him I was fired or I'm going to be fired, he went to Pat Patterson. Martel went to Pat Patterson and he asked, look, let me tag with Dino. I would be tag team partners. I could take all the bumps. Dino could be the strongman, do the strongman spots. And Patterson just shut him down and said, listen, he does not fit into our plans. The answer is no. And the reason that Martel asked was because he knew Bravo well enough to know that without wrestling and the money that he was making from wrestling to support the lavish lifestyle that he lived, he knew that he was going to fall into bad habits. And Bravo would tell him. Martel said that Bravo told, at least once before, Bravo said to him, look, I could go into crime and make really good money, but I don't want to do that. I know myself, and I know the kind of person that I am. I don't want to do that. And Martel said that he was embarrassed, going from this lavish lifestyle to having to borrow money from his mother. That was really the straw that broke the camel's back for him. That was his breaking point, when he had to basically go and kind of beg his own mother to borrow money. He knew that he had to do something. And at this point in the documentary, we learn about Vic Catroni, the leader of the first mafia family in the history of Quebec. Catroni was also Dino Bravo's uncle. Dino was his nephew. Vic was also a wrestler back in the 1930s. So there's another wrestling tie-in. They wanted to use Dino as muscle. They wanted to use him as an enforcer for collections and such. He was a big guy. Look, Dino Bravo was a big guy. It's very not necessarily big and tall, but he was a big dude. He was very imposing. Not too many people looked like him. And if he was coming to collect something, you'd be more than likely to give him what he was asking for and not pick a fight with him. So I could see why they wanted to use him in that capacity. And it was another way for him to make a lot of money. The day that he died, Jacques says Dino called him. Out of the blue. Called him, he says, can you come and see me? And Jacques thought it's very weird because he and Dino were not close. They knew each other, they respected each other, but they were not close. They were not close friends. And he said, oh, well, yeah, sure. I can come see you. I can't come today, but I can come tomorrow morning. And Dino was, okay, come see me as soon as you can. Now, I'm not saying that Jacques is lying and making that up about Dino calling him, but his brother Ray Rougeau, did a shoot interview on the Hannibal YouTube channel a while back, a few years ago. And Hannibal asked him about Dino's death. And Ray told a story very similar to the one that Jacques shared, but it was for him. It was how he found out about, what had happened to Bravo. In Jacques' version, Jacques was on his way to meet Dino, but he stopped off at a gas station. And I guess the gas station attendant must have recognized him as a pro wrestler, and he made a comment to Jacques, something to the effect of, "Boy, your friend really got it, eh?" And he had no idea what he was talking about. So he's like, "Oh, well, Dino Bravo. He got shot." So Jacques runs over and he checks the newspaper and he sees, on the cover of the newspaper, he sees what happened. In Ray's version, in Ray Rougeau's version, he had just landed at the airport after a TV taping for WWE. He was an announcer at the time. I don't know if he was still wrestling or if he had started announcing yet, but he was working for WWE. Actually, Ray Rougeau still does. I think he does the French commentary now on WWE pay-per-views and events. But he had just landed at the airport after a television taping. He's going through customs, and the agent says to him, "Boy, your friend really got it last night, eh?" I just find it hard to believe that there was a gas station attendant and a customs agent with such little regard for their feelings that this is what they would say to these two people who, they obviously knew they must have been friends, or, they must have known the victim, and they would both go, "Oh, well, your friend really got it last night, eh?" It's such a weird thing to say to somebody. And look, maybe it happened. Maybe it happened exactly the way they said. Maybe the gas station attendant said that to Jacques. Maybe the customs agent at the airport said the exact same thing to Ray. I find that hard to believe. I think maybe it's Ray's story and Jacques is using it, or Jacques. I don't know. I just thought that was very strange. But boy, that if it happened that way, that's a lot of really callous people up there, up north in that area. I don't know. That's kind of strange. So anyway, it's March 1993. Dino's home alone. His wife had taken their daughter to ballet class. Didn't get home until after midnight, which I thought was a bit strange. Why would they be getting home from ballet practice after midnight? The producers on Twitter, they clarified that the daughter's class, her ballet class, ran from 8 to 10 p.m. And it was about a half an hour drive. They apparently, on the way home, also picked up the daughter's uncle. Not Dino's uncle. That might be a little more apparent what happened here. But they picked up the daughter's uncle, and I guess the uncle was going to stay the night with them, and he was going to paint their house the next day. So because of all of that, they got home late. The daughter is sleeping. The wife gets out of the car. She's got the daughter in her hands. She's walking into the house, and she finds Dino dead in his recliner. Martel had said previously that the cops told him that the remote control for the TV was loose in Dino's hand. He had been watching hockey on TV. She finds her husband dead. She runs, I don't know where the uncle was, but she goes running out of the house. She runs to the next door neighbor's house. Tony Mioli, the promoter for International Wrestling. He had built his house right next to Dino's. That's how close the two of them were. Thankfully, the daughter was not awake when the mother walked into the house, so she didn't see her father like that. Scary to think about what might have happened if they had come home early that night, from ballet class. That's pretty scary to think about. This could have turned out a lot worse than it did. As it was, the guy was killed execution style. The cops found 17 bullet casings from 2 different guns, 17 shots, 10 to the torso, 7 to the head. Chris Jericho, in the narration of the episode, says it was 11 shots, 7 to the head, 4 to the torso. The 17, look, they found 17 casings. Obviously, it was 17 shots. The 17 shots, that's been repeated by multiple people over the years. In this same episode, they mentioned the 17 bullet casings, so I'm going to assume it was 17 shots. But really, at the end of the day, does it matter? Does it matter if it was 11 or 17? The end result is the same, right? You're not surviving that. You're not surviving that. One of the guns was left at the scene by his body. There were no signs of a break-in. The door was unlocked. which leads the police to suspect that he probably knew his attacker or his attackers. And there was also no sign that he tried to defend himself, no sign that there was a struggle, that he tried to put up a fight. And Dino Bravo was a big man. He could defend himself if he had to. Bret Hart, in his book, talked about how a lot of the boys, when they learned in the locker room, when they learned about what had happened to Dino, they talked about how they always come in threes in terms of like wrestler deaths, or you hear that about celebrity deaths, not just wrestler. I mean, wrestler deaths probably come in, this week they came in 4s and 5s, unfortunately, but he said that they were talking about how they come in threes. Andre the Giant had died in January. Kerry Von Erich killed himself in February. And then in March, Bravo was killed. So you have 1 natural causes, 1 suicide, and 1 homicide. Back to back to back. That's kind of crazy. So they talked about Dino's funeral, and his daughter said that she had drawn a picture of their family to place on her father's casket. She looked inside, and she really didn't recognize him at first, but then she noticed his hands and his fingers. I guess he had large fingers, and she knew that it was him. I can't believe that his funeral was open casket. The guy was shot in the head 7 times. That was the big surprise to me, that his funeral was open casket. There was a news report shortly after his death that mentioned Dino had told a friend that he was afraid for his life. And Jacques in the special here says he thinks that Dino did something he wasn't supposed to, and he knew that he was screwed. Interestingly, Bravo lived in a very upscale neighborhood, and there were 2 other men with ties to organized crime and illegal cigarette smuggling who were murdered in that same neighborhood a few months before Dino was killed. One guy was killed 9 months before, the other one was killed 4 months before. Police found $55,000 and contraband cigarettes in Dino's home 3 days after his death. To me, that's also strange. Why 3 days? I'm not sure why it would have taken 3 days to find that, but they found $55,000. They found contraband cigarettes. They felt his death was over money, and that 55 grand was enough to kill someone over. Now, the illegal cigarette trade was a $1.5 billion industry in Canada as of a decade ago. Big business. And it's still going on to this day. Just some of the stories that came up in my searching. 6 years ago, police arrested 28 people in a crackdown on tobacco trafficking allegedly involving Montreal's Italian mafia and local organized crime. 3 years ago, Canadian Mounties arrested 16 people in connection with an alleged tobacco smuggling ring. Just last year, 2019, 11 people were found guilty or who were guilty of tobacco trafficking were hit with $2 million in fines. 2 of them got shipped off to prison. So this is still a very active problem in that region, in that area. I guess very lucrative. In the documentary, they talk about the cigarette smuggling in the area, how it was run through the natives, the Indians. Dino's daughter thought they were just friends of her father, that whenever she would be with him and he would visit with them or whatever. The cigarettes were half priced. They were sold by the caseload. It was an open secret about Dino being involved because everybody, wanted to smoke. Everybody wanted to pay half price. Of course. Rick Martel, I said he wasn't interviewed, but they did air a portion of that shoot interview from 2007. Martel is the only wrestler who Dino confided in about his role in mob business. According to him, the Indians own the river. Dino met with them about smuggling cigarettes across the river. They were apparently big wrestling fans. They recognized him from TV. They knew who he was. And so that helped attract a lot of customers. So that did well. In fact, that did so well that it got the attention of the cocaine dealers. Now they wanted in. They wanted a piece of the action. And there was a $400,000 shipment that got seized by the police. It was sitting in a warehouse somewhere. It had not been picked up, I think, for 3 days, they said. Or Martel said too. And it ended up being intercepted by the Canadian Mounties. That's $400,000, almost $500,000 down the toilet If $55,000 wasn't enough to whack someone, $400,000 certainly is. This was maybe a week before he was killed that this happened. So it is entirely possible that Bravo pissed off the cocaine guys, and that's what got him killed. But we may never know the real answer. Case is still open. They even put a tip line phone number on screen for anybody that may have information. The killer or the killers, they've never been identified. They've never been found, which is why when the Quebec police were contacted for this documentary, they didn't speak to them. They claimed that we can't participate. We can't talk to you. I'll bet the Allentown police wish they would have said the same thing after that Snuka special. So they, again, are showing pictures of Bravo with his daughter when she was younger. The family, admits they probably will never get answers as to what happened. His wife talked about having to raise their daughter as a single parent, as a widow, at 28 years old. The daughter mentions that her mom, after Dino was killed, the mom, his wife, got rid of everything. All of his wrestling gear, she got rid of it. She gave it away to friends. She gave it away to family. That was her way of grieving. I guess she couldn't bear to look at it. She had to get rid of it. So it's not like the daughter has old boots or tights of his or whatever. The mom gave it away. She wants, the daughter wants her father to be remembered for his passion. His dying when she was so young, she said, it really created this huge void in her life. And you could tell, she's obviously in tears telling this. They're all still very sad about what happened, how it happened. She lives her life with the idea that you reap what you sow. And she hopes that whoever it is that killed her father, she almost doesn't even want to know who it is. She doesn't know if they're dead, if they're alive. Whoever it is, her only hope is that they got what they deserved. But she wants Dino Bravo to be remembered as a proud man who is very proud to represent Quebec in wrestling, and to be remembered as a good husband and a good father. And then the episode ends with her crying and, admitting that her father made, he was a man who made bad decisions. But she talked about her son. I think she's got 2 kids now, and her son is a dead ringer for her father. And that's how the episode ended. So pretty heavy stuff there at the end. When you look at it from the family's perspective, what a horrible situation. And what a horrible thing for the wife with her kid in her arms to walk home to and find that one night when they found him. It's an awful thing. And we're never going to find out. There's never going to be a resolution. Unless somebody on their deathbed confesses to something, this will never be resolved. We're never going to know for sure. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he wound up getting involved with the wrong people when, by all accounts, he knew that this would probably be what would happen. He didn't want to go down that road in his life, but he needed money. And when you got to make money, you do what you got to do. And I guess he felt that he had connections and this is an easy way to make money. And he took it too far. And in the end, he paid for it with his life.